The sudden silence across the Middle East was not a natural occurrence. It was a negotiated, highly fragile pause in what had rapidly become one of the most intense military engagements of the 21st century. For weeks, the skies had been dominated by the relentless tempo of Operation Epic Fury, a sweeping American military campaign designed to systematically dismantle hostile military infrastructure across multiple fronts. The sheer scale of the bombardments had fundamentally altered the strategic reality on the ground, creating a geopolitical shockwave that rattled global markets, paralyzed international shipping, and pushed regional powers to the absolute brink of direct, unrestricted warfare. And then, abruptly, the air raid sirens stopped. The fighter jets returned to their carriers. The missile silos were powered down. The world watched in collective disbelief as an unexpected announcement broke through the fog of war. The United States and Iran had agreed to a sudden, immediate 14-day truce. To understand the sheer magnitude of this development, one must look at the specific parameters that forced both sides to the negotiating table. This was not a peace treaty born of mutual goodwill or a sudden desire for reconciliation. It was a tactical pause driven by an ultimatum. The turning point arrived with a hard deadline set by President Donald Trump for Tuesday at 8 o'clock in the evening Eastern Time. The directive was unambiguous. Either an immediate cessation of hostilities and a return to the negotiating table would commence, or Operation Epic Fury would enter a new, devastating phase that would target the core economic and military lifelines of the Iranian state. The pressure was not merely rhetorical. The military assets positioned in the region were already calibrated for this escalation, creating a scenario where miscalculation would lead to catastrophic consequences for all involved parties. But the ultimatum alone did not halt the machinery of war. The diplomatic breakthrough hinged entirely on a highly classified 10-point proposal, the centerpiece of which addressed the single most critical choke point on the global economic map. The core condition, the absolute red line that made this 14-day truce possible, was the mandate for a complete, immediate, and safe reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. For weeks, this narrow strip of water separating the Persian Gulf from the Gulf of Oman had been transformed into a militarized no-go zone. Commercial vessels had been targeted, seized, or forced to reroute, effectively paralyzing the flow of roughly 20% of the world's liquid petroleum. The economic strangulation was palpable. Global energy markets were in freefall, insurance premiums for shipping had skyrocketed to unprecedented levels, and allied nations were facing the prospect of crippling energy shortages. The Strait of Hormuz is not merely a waterway. It is the jugular vein of the globalized economy. The historical context of this closure cannot be overstated. Decades of strategic doctrine from both Washington and Tehran have revolved around the control and access to this specific maritime corridor. For Iran, the ability to threaten the closure of the strait has long been its most potent asymmetric deterrent. It is the ultimate leverage, a way to project power far beyond its conventional military capabilities. For the United States, maintaining freedom of navigation through the strait is a foundational pillar of its global security architecture. When the tensions escalated and the strait effectively closed, it triggered a cascading series of economic and military crises that forced the hands of decision-makers in capitals around the world. The realization set in that a prolonged closure would not merely damage the regional economy, but would induce a global recession of historic proportions. The mechanics of the truce reveal a complex web of back-channel diplomacy and hard military calculus. As the Tuesday deadline approached, intelligence assessments indicated a flurry of communications routed through intermediary nations. The 10-point proposal was not drafted in a vacuum. It was the product of frantic negotiations designed to offer a viable off-ramp for both sides while preserving their respective strategic imperatives. The immediate opening of the Strait of Hormuz was the American prerequisite for pausing Operation Epic Fury. In return, the 14-day window offers Tehran a critical reprieve from the relentless kinetic strikes that were systematically degrading its defensive networks and command and control infrastructure. It is a calculated gamble, a fragile equilibrium where both sides have temporarily decided that the cost of continued escalation outweighs the benefits of a tactical pause. From a military perspective, the pause is viewed with deep skepticism by defense planners and intelligence analysts. Operation Epic Fury had achieved significant operational success, dismantling key radar installations, neutralizing coastal defense cruise missile batteries, and severely degrading the asymmetric naval capabilities that threaten the strait. Pausing the campaign at this critical juncture presents a profound risk. Military strategists argue that a 14-day window provides the adversary with invaluable time to reposition surviving assets, repair damaged infrastructure, re-establish disrupted communication networks, and prepare for a potentially more resilient defensive posture should hostilities resume. The intelligence community is currently operating at maximum capacity, utilizing satellite telemetry, signals intelligence, and regional surveillance to monitor every movement within Iranian territory. The primary objective is to verify compliance with the truce parameters and to ensure that the pause is not being exploited to alter the tactical balance of power. Conversely, the calculation in Tehran is equally complex. The economic pressure resulting from the closure of the Strait and the broader sanctions regime was creating unsustainable domestic strain. The leadership faced a critical inflection point. Continuing the confrontation risked the complete destruction of their most advanced military capabilities and the potential collapse of their economic infrastructure under the weight of Operation Epic Fury. Accepting the truce, even with the explicit requirement to reopen the strait, provides a necessary breathing space. However, this is not viewed as a surrender within the halls of their defense ministries. It is interpreted as a strategic realignment, a temporary concession designed to preserve the regime's core survival while shifting the conflict from the kinetic realm back to the diplomatic and economic arenas. The reopening of the waterway, under the watchful eyes of international monitors, is a concession made under extreme duress, but one that buys the most precious commodity in warfare: time. The global consequences of this sudden truce were immediate and profound. Within hours of the announcement, the international oil benchmarks, which had been trading at crisis premiums, experienced a historic crash, dropping by over 13%. This sudden normalization of energy prices provided instantaneous relief to global markets and allied economies that had been bracing for a protracted energy shock. Shipping conglomerates immediately began the complex logistical process of rerouting their massive tankers back through the Persian Gulf, eager to resume the flow of commerce that had been frozen by the threat of naval mines and fast attack craft. Yet the relief in the financial sectors is tempered by the stark reality of the military situation on the ground. The threat has not been eliminated. It has merely been paused. The warships remain on station. The strike aircraft remain armed and fueled. The ballistic missile early warning systems remain fully activated. The global economy is functioning under a temporary reprieve, wholly dependent on a 14-day clock that is rapidly ticking down. As the international community pivots toward the upcoming diplomatic negotiations in Islamabad, the underlying tensions remain completely unresolved. The fundamental disagreements that ignited this conflict are still firmly in place. The American demand for verifiable constraints on nuclear development and regional proxy networks clashes directly with Tehran's insistence on regional hegemony and the removal of economic sanctions. The 14-day truce is not a resolution. It is a high-stakes holding pattern. If the diplomatic track fails to produce a sustainable framework within this narrow window, the resumption of hostilities is virtually guaranteed. We are looking at two distinct and highly volatile forward scenarios. In the first, the intricate diplomatic maneuvering currently underway yields a breakthrough, establishing a new, albeit tense, security architecture for the region that allows for the continued flow of global commerce, while addressing the core security concerns of both nations. In the second scenario, the talks collapse under the weight of mutual distrust and irreconcilable strategic objectives. If that happens, the Tuesday deadline will be viewed in retrospect not as a turning point toward peace, but as a momentary intake of breath before Operation Epic Fury resumes with an unprecedented and devastating intensity. The next 14 days will determine the trajectory of the global economy and the stability of the entire Middle East. The clock is running.